Memories are their own descendants masquerading as the ancestors of the present. Ghostwritten, David Mitchell. Hello, and today I want to talk about Ghostwritten by David Mitchell. So this book is basically a series of short stories, and they're all kind of interwoven or joined together through sort of circumstances or little events that happen. So the first story is called Okinawa, and it's about this guy, and he's on the train, and he has like some chemicals, and he's doing like a poison chemical attack on the train, and then he escapes off of the train, and he runs out to the surface, and then he finds himself in Okinawa, and he ends up being part of this like cult, and like they believe in this like sort of magic leader, and they think that he has all these powers and stuff, and it's kind of follows his sort of ideas a little bit, but mostly he's just kind of hiding out in Okinawa. And when someone asks why he's there, he says that his wife has died, and that he's a computer programmer who runs a business, and basically he's there just to take a rest. And so he ends up staying there, and he has to move around a little bit to keep hidden, and he's asked later to help at the local school to teach some computer programming stuff. But while he's there, he makes this phone call because it's a number that he remembers from his like cult, and he's trying to get a hold of them because he needs some money to continue to stay in hiding. And so that's the end of the first story. The second story is called Tokyo, and it takes place in Tokyo, obviously. And it's about this guy, and he works at like this jazz sort of record store, and he's his Filipino mother, and his father is some unknown Japanese person, and so like he kind of has trouble fitting into society. He feels like he's a little bit of an outsider. At one point, one of the regular customers offers him a job at his publishing company, but the guy is like not really sure what he wants to do. But basically, he like loves jazz music, and he plays in a jazz band, or he makes some music himself. And then one day, this girl comes in with her friends, and he's kind of really attracted to her, and he can't stop thinking about her. And then one night, he gets this phone call, and it's he goes inside to answer the phone, and it ends up being this guy talking about it's the guy in Okinawa talking and asking for this money, but like he has no idea what's going on, so he just kind of hangs out. And I think he goes outside, and then he meets this girl again, and they end up becoming friends, and he ends up spending some time together. They spend up some time together, and then she has to go back to Hong Kong because she's from Hong Kong, and she's just visiting Tokyo for the summertime or something. And so she's going back to Hong Kong, and he's upset and sad, but he ends up deciding to go visit her. The next story takes place in Hong Kong. It sort of follows the story of this lawyer, and he works in this law firm, and he's a foreigner, like he's like a British person, I think, and he's in Hong Kong, and like it seems like he's doing some kind of sketchy stuff, and he's kind of might be in trouble, but he has a wife, but she leaves him because he has an affair with the maid, and also their apartment is haunted, and he's like stressed, and like it's like just life isn't really stressing him out. It's not going out. It's not going very well. And so one day he kind of has this like nervous breakdown, and he doesn't go to work, and he goes to like some mountain, and he climbs, and he ends up dying, and it kind of ends up revealing all of these problems that he was involved with at his firm. But I should say, before he dies, there's one night where he goes to this fast food restaurant, and he runs into the guy from Tokyo, and then the girl from Hong Kong. He meets them he sees them in a restaurant, just quickly and casually. And that's just kind of the way that story gets connected to the other stories. The next story is called Holy Mountain, and it's basically about this lady, and she grows up and she works in a tea hut on this mountain. And at the top of the mountain, there's this Buddha, and she kind of has this tree beside her house, and it's kind of a magical tree. She believes it's magical. She believes it can tell her things, and she kind of has like a really difficult life. She ends up being pregnant through like not a good situation, and her daughter ends up having to go live with someone else in Hong Kong. Basically, it just follows her life living on this mountain, not really leaving the mountain, not really going anywhere, and just like of the difference in as society changes. Like there's like the communists, and then like this youth group comes, and like all these different people come and tell her that the world has changed and that she has to do things differently. But basically, they're just like collecting taxes, and her life is basically staying the same regardless of what they say. And in the end, you find out that she has like a great granddaughter, and this great granddaughter is actually the maid, like the Chinese maid from the Hong Kong story. So that's the connection. And when the guy dies, she gets his money, and then so you can kind of like live like a pretty nice life with all the money that he had, because he just dies under these mysterious circumstances or whatever, and the money is just kind of left. The next story is Mongolia, and it sort of starts off on this train ride, and there's this guy, he's and this girl, they're on a train, and they're going to Mongolia, and like, but it ends up that it's actually about this like kind of like spirit, or this like non-bodied entity that's living within the guy, and then this spirit thing kind of like jumps out of his body into another body and gets passed around, and the spirit is trying to find this poem or this song, this nursery rhyme that it knows, and it's trying to find the rest of it. And so it's trying to search down the origin. And so it ends up like getting into a historian, and then it ends up getting into this KGB agent, and just to try and track down the story. But eventually it gets into this tribe that kind of lives out in the edges of society. This man, his wife has a baby, and then like he ends up the spirit is in the man, and the spirit ends up coming back, and he talks to like this grandmother who ended up being the origin of the story that he was looking for. And then she kind of tells him that he can either continue to be what he was, or this baby is going to die. And so the spirit goes into the baby, and then continues its life that way. The next story is St. Petersburg, and this story takes place in St. Petersburg. It takes place at like a museum or art gallery, and basically there's this group of people. There's this lady, she works at the art gallery, and she's, I guess, I don't know what she is. She's kind of like a security, or like she stands around the art. But she has like a boyfriend and this other guy, and they're working together. And her boyfriend basically has this contract to be the cleaners, like the floor waxers for the art gallery. And the other guy that they're working with, he creates duplicates, or he creates copies of the art. And so basically they sneak these duplicates into the art gallery, they change them up on the walls, and then they sell them. But in the end, their last heist kind of doesn't go well, and like basically almost everyone ends up getting killed. And the lady finds out that she was just being used the whole time. She was a pawn, and they were just using her to make this sort of plan work out. And the connection to the other stories is that they were using, like, the art sales people were doing money laundering, and they were using the lawyer in Hong Kong. The next story is called London. It's about a guy named Marco. And he sort of sounds like he's a womanizer, and he doesn't really have a lot to his name. But he writes, and he makes music, and he does just a little bit of other stuff. It basically follows his sort of life, and when it starts off, he is actually he has like this one night stand with this lady, and it ends up that the lady that he has the one night stand with is the wife of the guy from Hong Kong, the lawyer from Hong Kong. His job, though, one of his jobs is being a ghostwriter, and so he's ghostwriting the story for this sort of, I don't know if he's like a philosopher or something. He's kind of maybe famous a little bit, or at least his neighborhood was famous, or his house was famous because certain people went there during some influential time, and he's kind of writing his memoir. And then this guy, the ghostwriter for the story, he's just collecting stories from this guy and writing the book. And one of the stories he tells is about how there's this one day he had this really weird experience where he was eating in a restaurant, and he looked out the window and he saw this person who looked exactly like him, and it was like his doppelganger basically, and he followed him all through town. And as a result, like, he just spent the whole evening chasing down himself. And he always thought that was a weird experience, but he couldn't explain it. And it turns out, though, that the guy who he's doing the ghostwriting for, they're friends with this, I believe the guy's name is Jerome, and he was the one in the St. Petersburg story who created who was doing the replicas of these famous artworks. And so that's kind of how that story connects. The next story is called Clear Island, and it's about this, I think she's a physicist or a mathematician, but basically she is working on this project, and she ends up realizing that it's sort of for weapons, and she decides to quit, and so she runs away, and she's like on the run, and while she's on the run, she's like writing in this journal about this idea for, I think it's called quantum cognition, but basically it's like an AI, and she's like planning it out, but she writes it in this book, and then eventually she gets back home, and she knows that she's going to get caught eventually, and so like her community is a small community, and everyone welcomes her, and they want to protect her, but eventually the job that she ran away from, the guy is like involved with the intelligence agencies or whatever, and he wants to make sure that she comes back, and so he's threatening her to come back, and she ends up giving her book, her journal, to a goat to eat, and so that she gets to sort of set her own conditions when she goes back to work for this person. And so she does that, and so she's basically creating an AI. The next story is Night Train, and Night Train basically is this radio show, a late night radio show in New York, and it's this guy, and he takes calls and he plays music throughout the night. And one night he gets this call from someone called the zookeeper, and this person or this thing kind of is describing these rules that it has to follow, and it's talking about all these weird things that are going on, about like people dying, or like they have these events that are happening, and no one really, like the radio host doesn't really understand what's going on so much. But you keep on, like, you get there's other calls from this zookeeper, and it ends up that it's like this AI, and the AI is trying to keep sort of order within society, and there's going to be some war, there's going to be some battle, and then the AI basically prevents the two armies from fighting, but then like it just creates more chaos, and it's just hard for things to get to normal again. But the connection here is that the AI is the one that was created by the lady in the previous story in the Clear Island. And then the last part is called Underground, and this story it's just starting the first part of the first story, and it's just talking about this guy, and he's on the train, and he's about to release the chemicals, but he has all these like thoughts, or these like sort of references to these other stories that have occurred throughout the book, and then he escapes, he gets off of the train, and then that's kind of the end. Realistically, this is just like a series of short stories, and then they're like loosely connected. There's no persistent narrative, like there is no really storyline that connects all the stories together. Just the people connect the stories together, which is a good, interesting thing. But yeah, it's not really a novel per se. It's just a collection of short stories connected together in interesting, sort of unique or different ways. And some of the stories are easier. Some of the stories are easier to read than others. But overall, I would say it's a really good book. I enjoyed this book. Like it's a pretty thick book. It's a hard book to, like, not a hard book to read, but it's a long read. It took me like more than a month to read. But it was good. It was an enjoyable read. It was something that was worth reading. And so, like, what was interesting to me, though, was that all the stories were connected. So, like, all the things were connected. Like, even like, just little details. Like, you know, one person in one story, and then they're also in another story. Or, like, just sort of that idea. The idea that everything's connected is kind of a feeling or a sense that I got from this novel. And then too, like sometimes like the connections aren't clear, or sometimes the connections they kind of just exist at random. Like they're not necessarily meaningful connections, but there are connections, interconnected fates or destinies that are beyond our control. And I kind of get that feeling from this book. It's like all of this stuff is just sort of, it's like happening, and it's like flowing, and it's just like the natural path of things, and they're all interconnected. And I guess there's posed the question, like, is life is ghostwritten, and so, which is like, is there like someone else writing this story, and we're all just along for the ride? And I would say that I did enjoy this book. I really liked it, but like I can't really think of it, like at this point, I can't really think of like anything that was like super inspirational from it, or any like really great ideas. But it just was a good, enjoyable read. Like it was just like, I remember thinking like, this guy is pretty smart because he was like connecting this stuff together. But then I guess by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, okay, well, like they're not even connected together. Like they're just stories. And you know what? I actually read on Goodreads, I got like the reference to the person's like, oh, these are just short stories. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Cause like, it's kind of what I was thinking, but like to have someone else say, oh, that's what it is, then it kind of makes sense. So yeah, I wouldn't say that there's anything particularly mind-blowing about this book, but it was a really good read. Like it was a good story. It's a good stories, and maybe sometimes that's just all that we need. So yeah, Ghostwritten by David Mitchell. If you like my reviews, then click that subscribe button, click that like button if you like this video, and thanks for watching. We'll talk next time. Thank you.